So we come once again to Matthew chapter 5. We're making a little progress. This morning we're going to look at verses 38 through 42. And again, this is one of the most... I did a devotional the other day about hard verses in the Bible. Not hard to understand, but hard to put into practice. Can you think of any passages besides this one that is hard for you to put into practice?
Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments, obviously. That's excellent, Bill. Thanks. Anything else? Gene?
Matthew, judge not, lest you be judged.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Chapter 7, verses 1 through 4 or 5. Judge not, lest ye be judged. With the same way you judge, that's going to be how you're judged. That's a tough one. Anything else?
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Love your neighbor as yourself, even if he mows part of your yard for you or cuts down a tree that you love or something like that. Yes?
One more.
One more.
Be kind and tenderhearted.
Be kind and tenderhearted.
Be kind and tenderhearted.
Yeah.
Loving one another, Christ first.
Yeah.
I got it. Yay.
That's one.
We live in an unkind world, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And as we get ready to read this, it's been interesting watching my grandchildren this week. And there's a video game that I don't understand, but they would sit there for hours and play with each other. It's called Minecraft. You might have heard of that. And last night was a perfect example of little sweet, precious Princess Emmy playing with her 6-year-old cousin Joseph. You met Joseph last week. And they were playing Minecraft. And I don't understand the game, but they were doing this together, and Joseph started doing stuff that did damage to... She was creating a house or something. This is so typical male, female. She's creating a house and wants it all nice and wanted everything orderly in there. And he was sneaking in and pouring pots of lava on her house. Well, the little princess decided that wasn't something she wanted to do. And she kept, I don't know what it's not crying, it's really not whining, but it was complaining very hard against her 6-year-old cousin. I said, Emmy, you need to be kind. But he's pouring lava on my house. I said, yeah, but, it's only a game. I don't care. And if he does it again, I'm going to wipe him out of this game. And he did it about 3 or 4 more times. Every time he did it, he had this little... And she goes, that's not funny, Joseph. You do it one more time. She said this 4 times, One more time. Well, she finally had enough. And he did it again. And she wiped him out of the game. And he started bawling like a 2-year-old baby. You killed me! And whining. And Emmy looks at him. I told you I was going to do it. You did it to me, so I did it to you. Now, with that little context, illustration by my grandchildren, let's look. Someone read 38 through 42.
You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you.
And all God's people said? I think last week we dealt with truth, right? Honesty. To me, this is one of the most difficult passages of Scripture. I've used what I call my funny illustration before. It's not so much anymore, although it happens around here because we have more 2-lane roads. But somebody comes up behind you with their bright lights, they pass you, and they get in front of you. What's your first temptation to do? Put your bright lights on and give them a taste of their own medicine, right? And then you read this in the Bible and you say, oh, God, why did you put that verse in there? Why are these verses in the Bible? Now remember, as we have been reading Matthew 5, 6, and 7, we said this is probably the most important 3 chapters of the New Testament, as this is pure Jesus teaching. This is the principle of Jesus. We all want to say, what would Jesus do? We want to follow Jesus. We want to live like Jesus. And in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, Jesus is given that standard. And it's not, thou shalt not. It's really what thou shalt. This is really what to do in a situation, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a work situation, or whether it's with your neighbors, or whether it's just out there with strangers. And so, as we're going to look at this, hopefully you will be convicted. I am every time I come to this, because we deal with the sin that dwells in us, don't we? And I want to say this morning that of however many are here, 15, 20 that are here, some of us struggle with this more than others, and some of us don't struggle with this too much. And I would guess, I'm not sure, but I would guess Goldie is one of those that doesn't struggle with this too much. Oh, boy. I better move over to this side.
I was thinking of several things in there.
Okay.
Well, I don't think there's any of us that don't.
As I teach this morning, remember these are the words of Jesus, not the words of Jeff. So don't throw hymnals at me as we go through. So the first thing we want to look at is the actual law. Verse 38, Jesus says, again, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 21 and see the actual law.
Verse 21.
Exodus 21, verse 24. And someone would read that for us, please.
Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
I guess we should have read 23, right? But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. So the Old Testament law was very specific, right? If somebody hurts you by hitting you, then the punishment was to hit them back. And what is the most usage of this law in our society today? Capital punishment is the one that, if anybody's for capital punishment, They always pull this verse, this passage, out of the Old Testament. None of them take Matthew 5:38 through 42 when Jesus deals with what the Old Testament had to say. So the Old Testament law was that if somebody hurt you or killed you, that was required of them also. So for murder, there was capital punishment. Their life was taken from them. All right? Everybody's clear with that? So you have that in Exodus. You also have it in Leviticus 24:20 and Deuteronomy 19:21. So you got those, the standard of the law. And what it really did, as we break it down, is, first of all, that the punishment must fit the crime. The punishment must fit the crime according to the Old Testament. Let's look at Judges chapter 1. Right after Joshua, just before Ruth. Judges chapter 1, and we're going to look at verses 6 and 7. This gets a little graphic. And Adonai-Bezek, fled, and they, the Israelites, pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. And Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table, as I have done, so God has repaid me. Then they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. So here was a foreign leader in battle against Judah and the Israelites. And his reputation was, when he conquered a nation, he would cut off the thumbs and cut off the toes of the leaders, the kings of that nation, and they became beggars under his table, hoping to get scraps to be eaten. So when he was captured, what did the Israelites do? They cut off. They did to him what he had done to so many, and he actually said in verse 7, "So God has repaid me." So the application of the law in the Old Testament was the punishment must fit the crime. And so what he was guilty of, they did the same thing to him.
So they do that now?
No. Well, some places. Number 2, judicial verdicts, not personal vendettas. This wasn't something that people did on their own. So if somebody killed somebody in their family, they weren't allowed to just take their life. They had to take that before the judicial process. And the standard was, if they killed that person, then they would have capital punishment. But you remember in the Old Testament, and I guess this this kind of came up in the news last week with an illegal immigrant that killed, well, was she a reporter, or I forget what she was, but killed a young lady out in California. And it said in the article, I didn't know this, but that San Francisco has become like a city of refuge where illegal immigrants could go and not suffer any consequences. They would never be held accountable for being there illegally. Well, in the Old Testament, the Israelites had cities of refuge. And if you murdered somebody, you could go to that city, and they couldn't get you out of that city. The moment your toe stepped out of that city, though, they would be waiting for you to take you to the judicial system to offer capital punishment. So again, this was not a personal vendetta against somebody. This was a judicial verdict through the judicial process. All right? So that's how the Old Testament law was. And that's why a lot of people want to go back to that. Right? Wouldn't it be pretty convenient? But then you start, if you deal with one Old Testament law, what do you have to do? You have to deal with them all. What were some other things that people got stoned for, that got capital punishment for? Adultery was one?
Adultery.
What'd they do to them if they got caught for stealing?
Cut off their hand.
Chop it off.
Chop off their hands. What's amazing to me is how many people want to pick and choose laws out of the Old Testament. I remember there was one church we were at, my first church down in Florida. I was on the youth staff teaching in their Christian school, and they had a policy that women should not wear slacks. And they took it from, I think it's a verse in Deuteronomy that says a woman should not wear anything that pertaineth to a man. And so they, ladies, and so my wife had to wear dresses every time she came on campus, but at home she could wear shorts and there. But some of the people that were from Bob Jones University, where most of the staff were, they took it very literally, and even at home they only wore dresses or skirts. So, you know, that was the policy, and they were basing it out of one law, and my argument always won. If you're going to follow that one, what Old Testament law do Baptists break on a regular basis?
Probably the adultery one.
Well, no. I wasn't thinking that, John.
This is my Donald Trump.
Well, you and Donald.
Watch from way back.
What? No, there's an old joke that it was at school, and there was people. The kids were supposed to bring something that talked about their religion, and the Catholic boy brought in the rosary beads, and the Jewish boy brought in the what do you call the hat?
Skull cap.
Well, it's not a. It is a skull cap, but it's not. I forget the. I tell you, this Goldie, she's coming out. And then the Baptist boy comes, and he brings a casserole dish. So anyway, this church, which was very Baptist, with a capital B and a capital the rest of it, so they couldn't wear slacks, but when they came to a potluck dinner, they didn't pull any of those Old Testament dietary laws out of that, you know, because barbecue pork in the South is like heaven, you know. And so that was always my argument. And what people have done over the years is taken verses out of context and try to put them into a context where they just don't fit. And so as we look through this, we're going to really challenge the thing. But let me give you two passages of scripture, but we'll move on judicial verdicts, not personal vendettas. Exodus 21:1 and Deuteronomy 19:18 and 19, and you can read those. But usually, like in the Old Testament, and Jesus has been dealing with this, all through these last several portions of the Sermon on the Mount, he would say, what you have heard, and then what he says, but I say unto you. So there was always abuses. Is there abuses of the law today?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And probably the biggest abuse of law is the discretionary enforcement of such laws. They'll have laws on the books, but they won't enforce those laws. And that has become, I don't want to get too political this morning, but that has become the marching orders of the last 8 years, 6.5, of this present administration. They didn't like a law, so they didn't enforce it. And they issued orders not to enforce it. And it's just kind of abuse of the law. And it's happening today, and it happened back then. So the first thing we see under the abuse is they would take God's law and they turned it to individual license. They would take God's law and turned it into individual license to do what they really wanted to do. Is there any Star Trek fans in here? I'm a Star Trek fan. Does anybody remember Star Trek II, The Wrath of Conolly? Oh, no, Khan. That was a joke. My last name. Okay. Do you remember what Khan said when he thought he had the Enterprise in his sights? And he said, "Revenge is a dish best served cold." He was going to use it to his advantage. And that's what people do today. When I was growing up, again, we've used this illustration, there was a lot of things that Christians weren't supposed to do. But there never was any about gluttony. There was never, you shouldn't go to the buffet table. You shouldn't go at all. I'm sorry, Rosemary, I was pointing at you.
How did you know that's all I've been doing the last couple of days?
There.
Clairvoyant.
What was the answer?
Did you ever hear a church preach against overeating? Nope. I could give you tons of examples of what they have chosen to ignore. And but they focused on these over here. When I was a kid, you couldn't go to dances. There's a whole list there. We called them the filthy five or the dirty dozen, depends what you included on your list. So the abuse of the law was they turned it into individual license, and then civil justice became perverted to personal vengeance. Civil justice was perverted to personal vengeance. And again, I'm kind of, I don't know what's the word, bemused, not amused, but bemused at Christians these days on what they have to say about different people. I don't know in Houston how it's probably worse here, but I just want to say this, that I support the law against illegal immigration. But I don't think it's a capital punishment, but the way I hear people talking about this, they don't even want to consider any pathway to citizenship. Anybody in here beside me have gone to Mexico? I guarantee you, if you grew up in Mexico
You'd wanna get
and
out
you
of there.
couldn't get to this country legally, you would come illegally. That's not our fault, but that's the situation these poor people are in. I visited a community in Mexico that had built up in a garbage dump. They were actually squatting. It wasn't their land, but that was all they had. And their house would be two houses would equal the size of this room. They did have electricity. They did not have water. There was a community pump that they would go and get water to. But the river was just to the, I guess it would be the north of them. And every time it rained, that river flooded, and their outhouses were first in line to flow, and you can imagine what happened next. And I'm for enforcing laws, but now that it's been here for so long, if somebody's been in this country for 20 years, or they were born here, their parents came and they were born in this country, to me there ought to be some pathway to citizenship. Hey, my great-great-grandfather came from Ireland. It just happened to be at a time where this country was wide open to immigration.
You're Irish?
I'm Irish.
Oh, my goodness.
I got a bunch of drunken relatives.
Take Patty's Day all the way.
Okay, so that's a little of my thing, but I just cringe when, when Christians, they don't just say, I think they should send them all back to Mexico. I mean, they're ugly about how they say it and how they want to treat people. And it just justice gets perverted, and I just want to say to them all the time, well, where are your immigrants from? And have you ever stopped to think what we did in this country? We're all immigrants to the native people, Native Americans. We stole their land.
Yeah. Stole your land.
And not only that, but then we gave them desert. If you don't believe me, go to Arizona, New Mexico, and drive through the Navajo Nation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let my dog live on that land.
The one thing I look at, I don't mind people coming across the line with what you said, they don't have it. But they come over here and work for nothing, that drives our economy
It does.
down.
It does.
We have to work for $5 an hour. Can you live off $5 an hour? I don't think so.
I'll tell you what, though, Bill, when there was a guy named George down there, and I met him, and he got caught twice coming into the United States. What he would do is he'd come in and work and then go back to bring that money home to his family. And he had a wife and 3 children, I think. And I said, why do you do it? At first he said, I can't go back for 2 years or I'll be in jail for 5 years. If he got caught again, he was going to go. I don't think that system is in play anymore. I said, why do you do it, George? He says, well, if I stay here and work, I can make $5 a day. If I go across, I can make $5 an hour. He says, then you tell me what you would do. And I said, I get it, but there's got to be some kind of system developed. And boy, when they talk about it now, I'm telling you, people get all out of sorts about making illegal people legal. So anyway, the same thing's happening on both sides of the immigration issue. There's people who feel like they should just round up every illegal immigrant and send them back to Mexico. Can you imagine a kid that's been raised here in the United States and you send them back? And the drug cartels are running the whole thing. And but both sides have personal vengeance. I know people in Arizona that just lose their Christianity when illegal immigrants are brought into the picture. So anyway, as we work our way through, here's what Jesus had to teach on this issue. And he had two main points, and on the second one there was 3 sub-points to that. So as we look at verse 39, so that's verse 38, the law. So verse 39 is the teaching, 39 through 42, if I can get my Bible back there. You think my Bible would turn automatically to Matthew, right? $39, not $29. Here's Jesus. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. So the first thing he says in the first part of verse 39 is to not resist an evil person. And what does that mean? So in the first part of verse 39, he is prohibiting retaliation. Prohibiting retaliation. Let's turn to 1 Peter 3. Someone read 8 and 9 for us. 1 Peter 3.
Finally, all of you live in harmony with one another, be sympathetic, love as brothers, be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult, but with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing.
So Peter is reaffirming, remember he was there for the Sermon on the Mount, and he is reaffirming what Jesus said. And just sum up what Peter said. What did he say? Treat like you want to be treated. If somebody does something evil against you, he says what? Don't do evil to them. And if somebody insults you, in my version it said reviling, don't insult them back. Revenge is not the way to go. My grandchildren had trouble with this yesterday. You kill me, I'm going to kill you. I was trying to think that, well, if they kill you, how can you kill them back? But I didn't want to get into that discussion. Gene.
In the footnotes here, it says it was more of an insult than an act of violence when they slapped you. Point is, it's better to be insulted even twice than to take the matter to court. Exactly.
And in 1 Corinthians, among believers, you're not supposed to go to court against another believer. Anybody who said this biblical Christianity is easy stuff has never read the Bible or has never read and studied what Jesus was trying to tell us.
What I've often wondered, though, I can understand where you're not to go to court with them, but I'm wondering if that person is so ridiculously wrong, are you supposed to just let them do it?
Well, 2 answers. One, if it's a Christian, what are you supposed to do?
Well, you're supposed to have another brother come along and talk to them, but I'll just clarify.
And if that doesn't get any better, you're supposed to take it 2, and then if that doesn't get any better, you're supposed to go to the church, and they're supposed to remit.
We'll say this happens, it's a non-Christian,
Okay?
and they're ridiculously wrong, and they're taking you to court.
Well, if they're taking you to court,
Or
then you have to go to court.
you have to go, but it does say to try to settle on the way,
Sure.
which I can see it. But if they're ridiculously wrong, I guess all you can do is go through with it, right?
If if they are ridiculously wrong and they're not the ones taking you to court, what do you think, reading the scripture today, Jesus would tell you to do with it?
Well, if they're not, but I'm saying if they are.
No, if they are or if they're not. If say they owe you $20,000. This is again where the rubber meets the road.
Forgive them, you want them.
Jesus isn't saying turn the other cheek unless you deserve the money. That's why this passage is so hard, because our inclination is it's our reputation, or that's my money. That was what Emmy was so mad about. That was her house that Joey was pouring lava onto. That still cracks me up. A 6-year-old is pouring buckets of lava on a 9-year-old cousin's house. I wish it was easier, John. I do wish it was easier. And probably 9 times out of 10, all of us in here would go to court to get our $20,000 back. But that doesn't make that the biblical thing to do. Yeah. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. In fact, in the Corinthians passage, doesn't Paul tell the church at Corinth that they're going to court against each other? Doesn't he tell them it's better to suffer loss than to take your dirty laundry before the secular court? 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 15. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. You know, one of the things that was said about Jesus as he died on the cross, he didn't rebuke. He took the beatings. He took the insults. He reviled not back again how he was. And he's saying that before he goes to the cross, this is how he wants us to behave. And again, this is tough stuff. What if you, since I've been a pastor, I've seen just about anything. What if you were a family and in church, and a deacon's family was working the nursery, and the kids came home and told that this family had sexually abused them? First, if you're a father or a mother, more I think fathers, but what do you want to do to that person when you get that news? You want to take a shotgun after them and do it. I've had to mediate a lot of serious things. But here was always my thing, John, about taking it to court. If it broke a law, especially in child abuse cases or other cases. I mean, you can't hardly read a paper now, and it's a lot of women now that are having sex with a 14-year-old student. I mean, it's rampant in our society. If it violates a law, you're obligated to report that law.
You have to report it to Child Protective Services.
Yeah, absolutely. For years, Christians danced around that one, because if it was somebody in church, they thought they'd handle it themselves. Does not, even if it's not the law, the right thing to do, if somebody commits a crime, is to report that crime. That is not violating what Scripture is saying here. So whatever it is. And I've had lots of kids grow up and they'll call me from jail. All of a sudden I'll get a collect call. And they'll say such and such. And somebody that came to youth group once, and all of a sudden I'm their best friend and their pastor, But you don't mess around with that stuff. If they violated the law, and that's the same way, what if you had illegal immigrants coming to your church? What would you do?
It's kind of hard to do, but you need to turn them in.
You do need to report that. Because if somebody's violating the law, and even though they had a hard time in Mexico, and they're a believer and they want to follow Jesus, how can you support them doing something illegal? You wouldn't support them to rob or to steal, and you can't support them to be here illegally if they're not legal. Unless you're the President of the United States, then you can wipe it off. The second point here is practicing restraint. And he says in 39b, the first act of practicing restraint is self-control. 39, the second part says, if one slaps you on the right cheek, turn your other cheek. And again, in order to do that, if somebody passes you with their bright lights on, this is a silly example, gets in front of you, you have to practice self-control. It's not your job to give them a taste of their own medicine. Again, that's a hard thing because naturally the evil one has grafted into our gene pool about getting even and getting revenge. The second act of practicing restraint is self-denial. Self-denial, verse 40. And again, these are the words of Jesus. He says, if anyone wants to sue you, John, and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. So the answer to John's question is what? Self-denial. Here's some, on self-control, let me give you some scripture I forgot to give you. Galatians 5:22 and 23, self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 and 23. Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 13. Self-denial is just one of those things, and we looked at those in men's power of prayer. Again, from Matthew, I think it was 16, where Jesus says to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow Jesus. Deny yourself. That's one of the hardest things the modern Christian has to deal with. Now, we make joke about it, but Jim goes into the morning service, and he's really cold. I go into the morning service, and I need my flip-flops on. I need well, it wouldn't look pretty if I wore a beach shirt and so like right now, I got sweat just dripping from me. So what do you do in that situation?
What?
Do you satisfy Jim and make it so it's so hot in here nobody else can handle it? Or do you satisfy me and make it so everybody else is so cold? What you do is what I've learned as being a pastor for 32, you tick everybody off. You set the temperature so he's a little cold and I'm just a little warm. Right? That's the only way you can do this thing. You have to deny yourself.
Yeah, but he was turning blue the other day.
And this is one of the examples that happens all the time. And Somebody, when Karen and I, our first senior pastorate at Coloma Bible Church, I think it was our first potluck dinner. And back then I wasn't as good a husband as I am now. And so what I would do is I would leave for church about 8 in the morning and go down and be quiet. I could pray and I could prepare. I could take my time doing all the stuff to get ready to preach and everything. I left my wife at home with 2 little children. And, well, Jeff was born too. So 3 children, the oldest one 13, and the youngest one 3. And she was to get them all ready to go out the door. And on potluck Sunday, she also had to prepare. And the pastor's family always prepared 2 or 3 meals because they wanted to make sure nobody ran out. So she comes, she's running late because of all the responsibilities she has. So she pulls up to get these kids in the church and get her potlucks in there. And after she's there about 15 minutes, one of the ladies in the church came in just steaming, angry like I've never seen anybody angry. Evidently, Karen parked in her parking place.
Oh my God.
I am not kidding you. And she was just irate. It wasn't a handicapped spot. It was evidently...
First come, first serve.
Well, she didn't take it that way.
Then you're gonna get in trouble.
It's kind of like, have you ever seen somebody, you know, a lot of us always sit in the same pew, same spot. You walk in and somebody else is sitting in there. You know, how dare you sit where I'm going to sit?
My nephew had that happen. He went to a church visit, and he said he sat down. He got there a little bit early, and he said this couple came and stood right beside him. He stood there. He says, I knew what they wanted. Finally, he says, am I in your spot? Yeah, that's where we usually sit. So he moved and they sat down. But I mean, you know, if you're a visitor,
Right.
can't you excuse that?
Oh, my God.
Now, this sounds extreme, but I want to tell you, this is regular activity throughout the country in even a lot of our fundamental churches. They don't like the music. Some think it's too fast. Some think it's too slow. So we're going to leave the church and go somewhere else. You don't have programs for my kids. So we're going to go to a church that does. Now, as a pastor, what you're trying to say, why don't you stay and help us start a children's program? I was there when I first went there as pastor. There was only 12 people that went to church there, and only one of them was, or 2 of them were working families. The rest were retired. Had no children. My kids were the first ones there. And my son was still in the nursery age, and so my wife would teach the girl. She'd play organ, teach Sunday school, play organ, do children's church, you know, as part of the nursery, and she did all that. And if we would have had the same attitude as a lot of people, that we never would have gone there as a pastor. It's hard to deny yourself, right? It's hard. That's why this passage really stinks. You read this and you go, Jesus, please, enough. Enough. And then he adds more. And the last one is self-sacrifice. This one really gets me. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. It's really hard to self-sacrifice, because most of the time it's all about Jeff Conolly. That's my money, that's my house, that's my car, that's my stuff, and you want to use it? You want to borrow it? You want to spend the night at my house and you got screaming kids that you're bringing along with you? I go to bed at 4:30 in the afternoon or something. You know? Not quite, you know. But right, you know, we come to those issues and we come, and it's not about self-sacrifice, it's about self-preservation. Father in heaven, thank you for this passage of Scripture. It's, again, tough. Next week's even going to be tougher. I just pray that you'll open our minds and our heart to what you would have for us to do. These are your words, they're not mine.